Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. This week, the war in Ukraine completes 6 months. It's nowhere near an end. In the last few weeks and months, we've discussed the possibility of this war spilling over, of more countries joining. Tonight, we can tell you the devastation has spread way beyond Ukraine. Europe's economy has taken a serious hit. The euro has fallen to a 2-decade low. In the UK, inflation is soaring to a 5-decade high. The way things are going, a global recession may begin in Europe. Interestingly, in this gloomy surrounding, India is emerging as a bright spot. Growth forecasts are better than most major economies and inflation has already peaked, says the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India. Tonight, we'll look at some data to understand how India is faring better and how this is a position it should build on, because the Indian economy is not out of the woods yet. In a globalized world, no economy can be insulated from the rest. But the right policy can ensure that India makes the most of the situation. Europe's cup of woes is spilling over. The economy is in a bad shape. For weeks, we've been talking about an impending recession. Tonight, we can tell you the Eurozone is sinking. The euro is Europe's de facto currency and it has dropped to a 2-decade low. European economies are in dire straits. The global recession we've all been worried about could begin in Europe. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll discuss how bad this could be. We start with the story of the euro. They say the strength of a currency reflects the might of a nation. But the euro is not just any other currency, it is the identity of a united Europe. Europe has 27 countries, 19 of them use the euro as their currency. This bunch of 19 is called the Eurozone, and they're all struggling. The first big fall came in July. The euro hit parity with the dollar, meaning 1 euro was equal to $1. This happened for the first time in 20 years. For perspective, last July, 1 euro was $1.2. So last month it hit parity and now the euro has sunk further. Today it is cheaper than the US dollar. And this is a sign of economic distress. Why is the euro losing its value? Because European economies are struggling. They're facing 3 major challenges. Number 1, the energy crisis. Number 2, the high inflation. And number 3, political turmoil in some of their biggest economies. Europe was already fragile after the pandemic. These 3 problems have exacerbated the situation. First, the energy crisis. It could single-handedly ruin Europe's economic future. This is how it began. Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe sided with Ukraine. It backed sanctions against Russia. Russia struck back and disrupted gas supplies, and now Europe is suffering. Yes, the invasion of Ukraine has no moral justification, but Europe dug itself into a hole by sanctioning Russia without a backup for energy supplies. They're paying a hefty price for this. Experts are already counting the losses. I have some numbers for you. Supplies to 12 EU member states have been hit. They've either completely lost access to Russian gas or they're getting only partial supply. So only 12 countries directly hit, but all of Europe will feel the impact. And it will not be a pretty picture. Consider an assessment by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It says 3 countries will be very badly hit: Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. A complete end of Russian gas supplies will be a big blow to their economies. They could shrink by as much as 6%. But the worst hit will be Germany. It is the largest economy in Europe. It gets almost half of its gas supplies from Russia. If Moscow cuts off this supply completely, Berlin stands to lose a whopping $225 billion in the next 2 years. Let me repeat that, $225 billion in losses. That's what Germany faces. Yesterday we told you how crucial their economy is to Europe. It is their growth engine. And now it's stalled. It's only a matter of time before the rest of this continent feels the impact. What's making things worse is the skyrocketing inflation. It's at a 25-year high. Inflation in Europe touched almost 10% last month. And the Eurozone is not insulated by the rising cost of living. Inflation in the 19 countries that use the euro as their currency touch almost 9%. This is the average. The numbers look pretty bad for some countries individually. Like Estonia, their inflation has crossed 23%. Latvia, over 21%. Lithuania, almost 21%. From energy to food, everything is expensive in Europe these days. Again, the numbers are scary. Energy bills in Europe have shot up by almost 40%. Food, alcohol and tobacco, about 10%. Industrial goods, 4.5%. Services sector, 3.7%. So there is runaway inflation. And more often than not, this leads to a political shake-up. Leaders lose their jobs when prices become so high and remain high over a long period of time. The first casualty is Italy. The government of Mario Draghi has crumbled. The trigger was an economic relief package. It was aimed at addressing the rising cost of living in the country, in Italy. In the month of May, inflation touched almost 7%. It's a 36-year high. Prime Minister Mario Draghi was trying to address it, but one of his coalition partners backed out. They said Draghi's support package did not go far enough. So the allies pulled support. The government collapsed. Italy will hold an election next month. Investors are already worried about the outcome. Italy, is the third largest economy in the European Union. So political instability is a must. Political stability, rather, is a must to address inflationary pressures and to revive Europe's economy as a whole. If Italy flounders, the rest of the Eurozone will struggle too. Investors are losing faith, it seems. In the month of July, they dumped Italian government bonds. Italy is already being seen as a basket case. Then we have the United Kingdom, technically not part of the European Union anymore, but a major European economy nonetheless. The UK too is struggling. As the Conservatives look for a new Prime Minister, inflation is biting the people. A major US bank has made a dire prediction. It says inflation in the UK is on track to cross 18%. This would be the UK's worst inflation in almost 50 years. The Bank of England blames the energy crisis for all of this. It is officially predicting a recession.
Now, this rise in energy prices has exacerbated the fall in real incomes and so led to another significant deterioration in the outlook for activity in the UK and in the rest of Europe. GDP growth in the UK has slowed and the economy is now forecast to enter recession later this year.
This has unsettled many workers in the UK. Earlier this week, thousands of dock workers announced a strike. They're protesting for the first time in 30 years. They say they're unable to make ends meet. They want salary hikes immediately.
It's nothing to do with a national strategy or anything like that. It's something which has happened here at a local level, and it reflects what's happening elsewhere because people all over the country, I think, are feeling the same way. That's why it appears to be, perhaps it appears to be coordinated because people everywhere are feeling the same way and coming to the same conclusion. Enough is enough. We are not going to take this anymore.
And these workers are not alone. Transport staff, postal employees, garbage collectors, even some lawyers, they've all announced walk-offs. This is the picture of the UK. So as Ukraine completes 6 months of war, the devastation, like I said, is being felt way beyond its borders. Europe's economy is bleeding and the whole world is bracing for impact. So that's a lot of bad news in the West. What about the home front? How is the Indian economy performing? To be honest, it is surprisingly resilient, almost like a bright spot in the world right now. First, let's look at some numbers. India's consumer inflation was 6.7% in July. The month before, it was 7%. So inflation appears to be cooling down in India. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India says it may have peaked in the month of April. And if so, the worst is behind us. The next economic indicator is growth. The IMF's GDP projection for India is 7.4%. That's much higher than most developing economies. China is just 3.3%. The final indicator is manufacturing output, your factories and workshops. Now, we use something called the PMI to measure manufacturing output. PMI stands for Purchasing Managers' Index. In June, India's PMI was 53.9. In July, it rose to 56.4. That's the quickest pace in almost 8 months. So India's factories are slowly getting back to speed. Compare this to the situation elsewhere. Europe is staring at a power crisis. In the US, inflation is at a multi-decade high. Japan's economy is so bad, they're asking young people to buy and drink alcohol. So how exactly did India escape the worst of it? You could say it's a mix of policy and luck. Let's focus on inflation first. Prices rise when there is too much cash in the economy. It's simple economics. If everyone has money, then money has less value. That's how it works. And during the pandemic, that's exactly what happened. Every country announced stimulus packages. This included cash handouts, subsidies, tax cuts. The idea was to put more money in people's pockets. And I have those numbers for you. America's total stimulus was almost $5.5 trillion. 5.5 trillion. 27% of their GDP. The UK spent 18% of their GDP on stimulus. Australia, almost 20%. Canada, again 20%. Japan, a mind-boggling 53%. And the European Union, 11%. Put together, the G7 spent a fortune on fiscal stimulus, nearly $8 trillion. Now, don't get me wrong. Many people needed that money to survive the pandemic. It is also good politics. Hand out checks to people in trouble. But good politics is often bad economics. Take the United States, for instance. They put $1 trillion directly into bank accounts. $1 trillion. That sort of cash infusion is bound to have consequences, and it did. US inflation topped 9% in June this year. What about India's fiscal stimulus? The government of India announced 2 separate packages. Put together, they clocked $300 billion. That's around 3.5% of India's GDP. Was that enough at the time? Perhaps not. But instead of fat checks, India focused on supporting the economy, on food subsidies, on liquidity, and on growth incentives. 2 years later, it has worked in India's favor. Call it luck or foresight. The fact is, India's inflation is cooling off compared to the rest of the world. Another reason is the energy policy. After Russia invaded Ukraine, most Western countries stopped buying Russian oil. As a result, oil prices shot up. They reached $120 per barrel. Now, oil is like the remote control for inflation. If oil rises, everything becomes more expensive. So what did India do? It bought Russian oil at a discount. Reports say Russia was selling at $30 less per barrel. That's 2,400 rupees per barrel less. That's the discount. And those discounts certainly helped India. Compared to the West, this was a much better situation to be in because the West looked clueless. The US may produce oil, but their energy companies scooped up massive profits and the common man was left high and dry. In Europe, gas was the issue, not oil. Energy bills increased rapidly as Russian gas slowed down. What about China? Well, they too imported discounted Russian oil, but their economy was clipped by zero COVID lockdowns. What's the use of oil if your factories are shut anyway? India steered clear of all of that. Yes, the lockdowns were painful, but they were also short. India never obsessed itself with policies like zero COVID. The focus was on both life and livelihood. And I know it all sounds very good, and that's something to cheer about, certainly, as the world braces for a recession. But I must say here that India is not out of the woods yet. Multiple factors can still derail the economy. Number one, the global economic situation. If the US or Europe falls into recession, India will feel the blowback. Trade will slow down. The rupee will fall. Western companies could downsize Indian operations. You get the picture. In this globalized world, a recession is also exported. Factor number two is inflation. India's numbers are much better than the rest of the world, but they're still too high for comfort. The RBI's optimum inflation level is 4%. The actual figure is 6.7%. So keeping prices under check will be a major priority. Factor number three, jobs. A large population means a large job market. India must create 90 million jobs by 2030. If not, there will be jobless growth. Meaning, your GDP will keep rising, but people will not have meaningful jobs. And that's a big risk for India. To navigate this crisis, India must leverage its current position. Every major economy is slowing down, so India must offer itself as the alternative for investments, for manufacturing, and for services. One example is the recent decision by Apple. The company has decided to manufacture their latest iPhone in India, the iPhone 14. The first batches will be produced by late October or November. Now, the launch is still happening out of China, but it shows that the gap is reducing. India could very well displace China as the world's iPhone maker. That's a good start. That means a lot of jobs, a lot of investments, and a lot of taxes. And that's the key to any growth story. Being the bright spot is not enough. It's about how you build on that resilience. So the next couple of years will be key for the Indian economy. And since we're discussing economies, how can we not talk about China, the world's second largest economy? How are they faring? They're plunged into darkness, quite literally. Let me show you some pictures from Shanghai. This is the famous Shanghai skyline, a symbol of a developed China. It has now been forced to switch off the lights because China is facing a power crunch. So much so that officials have issued orders to ration power supply. And they're going to great lengths to save electricity. I have some more photographs for you. This is an office in China's Sichuan province. It looks like a sweatshop. Only the computers are running here. The employees are working without any lights, air conditioners, or even fans. I wonder if there's a ban on charging their mobile phones too. Then we have this picture. Giant blocks of ice have replaced air conditioners in this office. Again, this is from China's Sichuan. Last week, this province ordered power cuts for just 6 days. Now that order has been extended to 11 days. So perhaps offices in Sichuan will need more ice because they're not getting any electricity anytime soon. China is facing its longest and most severe drought in a long time. 66 rivers in 34 provinces have dried up. Rainfall is down by 60%, and remember, China depends heavily on hydropower for its electricity. 90% of China's power supply needs extensive water resources. So when there's no water, there can be no electricity. China is famous for the Lesan Buddha statue. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the year 2020, these riverbanks witnessed a flood. There was so much water, it reached the toes of the statue. And now look at this. This is what the Lesan Buddha looks like today. The riverbanks near the statue have completely dried up. Over 5 million people are affected by the drought and power cuts in China, and there's no short-term relief in sight. These natural disasters are hitting the Chinese economy, and their impact is expected to be as bad, if not worse, than the Wuhan virus pandemic. There's a sharp rise in factory shutdowns in China. Last week, 39 factories were closed. The week before that, almost 20 factories had to close their operations. So the numbers have more than doubled. And we don't know if the shutdown is temporary or permanent. Either way, these disruptions will hit the Chinese economy hard. The property crisis has already pushed China towards a recession. Everyone is feeling the impact. Here's a headline that's been doing the rounds. The rich are selling their Rolex watches, and also on sale are luxury bags from Hermes. China has a major market for second-hand luxury goods. Suddenly, it is witnessing a lot of activity. The rich and wealthy are going to the sellers in droves. There is excess supply. The sellers have been forced to cut prices. It's simple economics. Supply is more than demand, so lower prices. So if you're into luxury goods, you could say that this is a silver lining in the dark cloud that is the Chinese economy. But here's a question. Why are the rich selling their luxury goods? Why are they selling their Rolex watches and their bags? To raise quick cash, that's according to one report, and it makes sense. In an unstable economy, cash is king. If the rich are struggling in China, you can only imagine what the middle class is going through. Beijing may not have formally declared a recession, perhaps it never will. But the people of China say they already feel it. They say every conflict has a turning point, something that escalates a frozen front line or draws more players into it. For Ukraine and Russia, that point is now. The trigger was a car bomb blast near Moscow. We told you about it yesterday. The attack claimed the life of Daria Dugina. She was the daughter of Alexander Dugin. Many call him Putin's spiritual guru, the brain behind his policies. Both father and daughter are right-wing ideologues, according to some, even fascists. Earlier today, a special memorial service was held for Daria in Moscow. Her father addressed the service. He said Daria had died for her country.
If someone was touched by her tragic death, her personality and her integrity, she would have only one wish. Do not remember me. Do not glorify me. Fight for our great country. Protect our faith and our holy orthodoxy. Love our Russian people. Because she died for the people. She died for Russia on the front line. And that front line is here.
The service is over, but the controversy is not. Russia is accusing Ukraine of plotting this attack. They have even identified the suspect, 43-year-old Natalia Vovk. She is said to have arrived in Russia on the 23rd of July. Accompanying her was her 12-year-old child. She rented an apartment in the same building as Daria Dugina. She also managed to plant an explosive device on her car. So where is she now? According to Russia, Natalia fled to Estonia. Now remember, this is Russia's version of events. Ukraine has firmly denied any involvement. And honestly, it's too early to draw conclusions. The attack happened on Saturday. The case was cracked by Monday. That's simply not enough time to solve such a complicated case. On paper, Ukraine has the motive to carry out this attack. After all, they are on the counter-offensive. But strategically, this attack, this car bomb, makes absolutely no sense. Ukraine gains nothing by taking out Daria Dugina, so the blast itself will have to be investigated further. As for the politics, things have already spiraled out of control. Estonia is now on Russia's radar. Moscow is accusing the country of harboring the Ukrainian suspect. They want her to be extradited. And how is Estonia responding? Their police won't even say if the suspect is in their country. You see, Estonian law protects the identity of people who cross the border. It can only be revealed under specific circumstances. But Russia is not waiting around. They're threatening action against Estonia if the suspect is not extradited. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said there would be no mercy for those behind this murder.
I believe that this was a barbaric crime for which there can be no forgiveness. And those who organized it, as I understand it, the FSB has already established the facts that are now being investigated. The investigation, I hope, will be quickly completed, and as a result of this investigation, of course, there can be no mercy for the organizers, instigators and perpetrators of the crime.
Despite all these threats, Estonia stands firm. What is the source of their confidence? Perhaps NATO. Estonia is a member of the Western Military Alliance, the NATO. They are protected by Article 5, which means if Russia attacks Estonia, it will be an attack on NATO. That's what Article 5 says. If one member is attacked, it's an attack on all members. So all 30 NATO members will have to respond. And that's one reason for Estonia's confidence. Another reason is history. Estonia has always punched above its weight, whether it's against China, the Soviet Union, or now Russia. In fact, they're leading the European campaign against Moscow. Last week, they banned Russian citizens from their country. No visas, no travel permits. Estonia is now completely closed to Russian visitors. Now, all of this will enrage Vladimir Putin. First, the attacks on Crimea, then the counter-offensive near Kherson, and now the targeted car bomb in his own capital. So chances are Putin will respond. US intelligence reports indicate that Russia is planning a major attack, perhaps on a government building or even civilian infrastructure. So the Ukrainian government has put its people on high alert, especially tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 24th of August. It's the Independence Day of Ukraine. Normally, it would be celebrated with parades and rallies, but not this year. This year, all Independence Day events have been banned. Kiev is putting safety over celebration. This week also marks 6 months of Russia's invasion. Frankly, it's become a directionless battle. Russia is not sure what their strategic aims are. Is it the Donbass? Is it the entire eastern territory? There is no clarity. Meanwhile, Ukraine's plan has also changed. Initially, they seemed interested in a peace deal, but now they're on the counter-offensive. They're openly mocking Russia. On Saturday, Ukraine held a special military parade in Kiev. No Ukrainian tanks were on display. Instead, destroyed Russian tanks were paraded. Residents were seen laughing and taking selfies with the destroyed Russian machinery. It makes you wonder, is anyone interested in a settlement anymore? The US is sending more weapons, Ukraine is planning to retake the lost land, and Russia is plotting more strikes. Instead of looking back at the last 6 months, both sides seem to be preparing for another 6 months of fighting. And this week will also be crucial for millions of young people in the US. Their president is weighing an important decision. What should be done with student debt? If you're in the US, you know what I'm talking about. Student debt has become a burden on America's youth. How much money are we talking about? $1.6 trillion almost. That's America's outstanding student debt. Almost 40% of all Americans have taken loans to study. They spent years trying to repay it. You may have seen Hollywood plots revolve around it. Workers in their 30s still paying off loans or mortgaging their house to make the deadline. All of this happens in the US, for real. But since the pandemic struck, they've got some relief. In March 2020, the US paused most student loans. The idea was to ease the pressure on workers. And since then, Joe Biden has extended it 4 times. The next extension is due on August 31st, end of this month. Biden could be beyond pausing the student debt this time. He may actually forgive it. Reports say White House officials are inclined to cancel student debt. They've set some conditions. A, only up to $10,000 will be cancelled. The rest will have to be paid. And B, the borrower must be earning less than $125,000 per year. If you meet these conditions, your student loan could be cancelled in the US. You may not have to pay it anymore. And I know it sounds like an easy fix. If the government can spend trillions on weapons, surely it can spend money on education. Well, not necessarily. Forgiving student loans is a political lightning rod in the US. The Republicans oppose it completely. They say students must earn their success. And they compare loan forgiveness to handouts. Democrats are on the other end. They're demanding a much bigger package. They want Biden to forgive loans up to $50,000, not $10,000. The ideal policy, I say, is somewhere in between. Why is that? Because loan forgiveness is a one-time fix. It does not help the next set of borrowers. Neither does it help people who have already repaid their loans. A much better solution is cheaper debt, which brings us to the root cause of this crisis. Expensive colleges. The US is one of the most expensive places to study. I have a list for you. The average tuition cost in the US is $8,200 per year. In Australia, it is $4,700. Austria, $900. Canada, $5,000. Denmark, Estonia, Finland and Germany, $0. Public colleges do not charge any money in these countries. If they can do it, why not the US? Why is the richest country in the world saddled with student debt? Because of 3 major reasons, and all 3 boil down to how US colleges function. Reason number 1 is the obsession with sports. Colleges are the first step to America's favorite pastime, professional sport. Whether it's baseball, football, basketball, all these sports are part of colleges in the US. Players start off in college, they get noticed by scouts, and then they get offers from professional teams, which means a lot of infrastructure and investments. Even elite US universities are obsessed with sport. If the team becomes successful, there's a lot of money to be made. I'm talking about sponsorships, ticket sales, merchandise. So colleges pump millions into developing state-of-the-art infrastructure. Reason number 2 is the emphasis on sprawling campuses. This includes massive dormitories, dining halls that beat restaurants, and so-called relaxing facilities. I'll give you an example. In 2018, a new trend emerged around US colleges. They began building lazy rivers. It's basically a mini water park near the college pools. Yes, the kids enjoyed it, but they probably won't enjoy the loans that paid for it. And finally, reason number 3, and probably the most important one, is lack of state funding. Colleges kept adding more facilities and luxuries on campus. At the same time, government subsidies kept disappearing. Again, I'll give you an example. In California, The state spends $1 billion more on prisons than colleges. So the tuition fees inevitably go up, and along with it, student debt. How can the US solve this crisis? Forgiving the current debt may sound attractive. It will also help millions of struggling Americans, but it is not a long-term solution. For that, the US needs a systemic reboot. The government must realize that education is not a luxury, it is a right. That's for all governments all over the world. It's not about water parks and sprawling dining halls. It's about giving everybody the opportunity to learn. And don't forget, we're talking about the United States of America. If they can fund endless wars in West Asia, they can surely teach children for free. But then again, we don't live in the most ideal world. Here, more often than not, things don't happen according to our liking or expectations or even logic. Hungary's weather service chief will be able to back me up here. She was fired from her job because a rainstorm that was predicted changed course. You heard that right. Hungary has fired its top leaders at the weather service over a faulty forecast. How often does that happen? This has led to a political storm. Here's a report.
When a train derails, you fire the driver. When a building collapses, you fire the contractor. When a fish die in a river, you fire the climate chief. But who do you fire when it does not rain? The weather gods or the weather experts? Hungary recently fired a bunch of them. Want to know why? Well, on Saturday, the 20th of August, Hungary was marking St. Stephen's Day. It was a national holiday. The country wanted to celebrate with some fireworks. A big-ticket event was planned and promoted as Europe's biggest fireworks display. This was Hungary's chance to make a mark in the sky. Some 40,000 fireworks were ready to be taken to the top, burst into flames, and immortalized into numerous photos and selfies. 240 launch locations were marked along the Danube River. This was Budapest's big day. 2 million people were waiting with bated breath and sparkles in their eyes. But, yes, there is a but, the fireworks never took off. No, they were not damp. It was the weather that decided to play a damp squib. Just hours before the event came a warning. A rainstorm was on its way. The message was sent straight from the office of the weatherman. Dismissing it was not an option, so the government postponed the firework display, and the good citizens of Hungary decided to stay home. They stared out of their tightly shut windows, waiting for extreme weather to rain over what was supposedly going to be Europe's biggest fireworks display. An hour passed, and 6 more. The fireworks did not go up, and no rain came pouring down. Was it a cruel joke the weatherman had decided to play? Was it fate? Or did the storm, the weather gods, sway? Turns out it was the sneaky rainstorm that decided to change its way. Instead of Budapest, it went to another part of Hungary. And you know what they say about millennials and meteorological services. You can never tell. They tried. A Facebook apology was posted. Oops, it didn't rain. We are sorry. It happens. Hungary was hungry for revenge. The government fired the leaders in the Met Office, including Weather Services Chief Cornelia Radix. She had been in office since 2013. Never had she imagined that a fickle-minded storm would one day reign over her career plans. Neither did her deputy, Goila Horvath. But one cancelled firework and the two are fired. Some people in the country are fuming. They say the climate is becoming extremely communist. Courtesy Prime Minister Viktor Orban. An independent lawmaker wants the weather department to strike. The opposition wants some drama. Then there are some who want the fireworks cancelled because, hey, there's a war next door. And the country's economy is going up in flames anyway. The poor meteorological service just wants its leaders back. and many just want to see the fireworks. But that's not happening until the weekend. You know, provided the weather gods don't shower their blessings on Hungary again, we will be looking up at the skies, holding an umbrella, of course. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Before I begin the next story, let me show you some videos. These are women dancing in solidarity with Finland's Prime Minister Sanna Marin. Each of these videos came with the hashtag Solidarity with Sanna. It's a campaign to let Finland's Prime Minister be. Now, some of you may have been following the story since day one. We also told you about it. But for those of you who did not follow, let me do a quick recap. The story began with a video. This one, it shows the Finnish Prime Minister partying with her friends. The group is seen dancing and singing at a house party. The video has shocked some people. The sight of a Prime Minister letting her hair down was perhaps too much for them. Some call Sanna Marin an insult to her office. Some call for her resignation. The opposition went a step ahead. It asked the Prime Minister to take a drug test. Even a member of her own party, her own coalition in fact, supported this demand. Sanna Marin is 36-year-old. She was elected to office in 2019. Until some time ago, she was the world's youngest Prime Minister. Now, dancing and singing are perfectly normal activities. Everyone blows off steam every now and then. So why was the Prime Minister being pulled up for partying? There is no law forbidding a leader from having fun. In fact, many are praised for taking some time out. Like Russian President Vladimir Putin, he's routinely photographed going off on adventure trails. His shirtless photos are branded as cool. US presidents are often photographed on family holidays. When they take off to Camp David, the trips are showcased as work-life balance. When Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau posts photos like these, people applaud him for spending quality time with loved ones. So what was it about the Finnish Prime Minister's video that upset people so much? Was it really the clothes and the dancing? Or was it the thought of a young woman leader having some harmless fun? Did it automatically mean that she was incapable of handling a high office or balancing work and life? Or can a woman who dances not deliver on her professional promises? And I'm not here to weigh in on her capabilities as a leader or whether she's delivered in office. If her voters think she hasn't, they'll tell her in the next election. I'm only talking about a video and how she's being judged for it. How did it become a national scandal and a global headline? The world has more serious things to worry about than a Prime Minister doing what regular people do. Finnish voters, by the way, agree. These videos are their way of telling the Prime Minister's critics that there is no harm in dancing, that dancing is normal regardless of whether or not the person dancing is a Prime Minister. Sanna Marin says, I have a family life, I have a work life, and I have free time to spend with my friends, pretty much the same as many people my age. And that's exactly the point we're trying to make. Should you stop being who you are the moment you enter office? I think gone are the days of leaders trying to project themselves as superhuman or wearing a veil of secrecy and mystery. Today, leaders should be relatable and accessible, as parents who see nothing wrong in bringing their children to work, as people who have a family, who have friends and a life outside work, as citizens who too queue up to vote. Of course, Sanna Marin did not expect her party video to become public, but now that it has, she has no regret, she says. I danced, sang and partied perfectly legal things. She also took a drug test. She was forced to. In fact, there was a lot of pressure on her to take this test. It has come back negative. So the backlash has backfired, and so did the demand for a drug test. We say Sanna Marin did nothing wrong by partying. She was only being human. But this episode has thrown up some very important questions, both for voters and for politicians. How do you want your leaders to be? Do you want them to be normal? Or do you want them to be disturbingly perfect? Would you like your Prime Minister to be someone who works all the time, is serious all the time, or would you rather she be more like you? Someone who believes in working hard, partying harder, and showing up to work the next day. As the definition of an ideal person changes, as the definition of what's perfect changes, perhaps it's also time we change the lens through which we view our leaders. Think about it. And before we wrap tonight's show, there's an issue that we must talk about. Have you noticed how so many young people are dying of heart attacks? I know I've spoken about this in the past and repeatedly, but there's a need to talk more about this and try and understand why heart attacks are suddenly claiming young lives. For the longest time, heart ailments were problems we associated with older people, those above the age of 60. But earlier today, a young politician died in India. She was all of 42. She died of a heart attack. A couple of months ago, it was singer KK. He was 53 years old. He died of a heart attack. Cricketer Shane Warne, 52 years old, again died of a heart attack. Young actors have died. Young athletes have died. They were all seemingly fit people. So what went wrong? Before we put together this story, we spoke to some doctors to look for answers, and this is what they told us. They said there are 6 things that make a person vulnerable to heart attacks: diabetes, blood pressure, blood cholesterol, smoking, family history, and lifestyle. How vulnerable you are to a heart attack depends on how you fare on this chart. But here's the thing. Neither high sugar levels nor high blood cholesterol levels is a new phenomenon. People in their 30s and 40s have been diagnosed with these problems for a while now. People in their 30s and 40s have also been smoking for generations now. So what has changed recently? And this is where we need to understand the biology behind a heart attack. What triggers it? A person suffers a heart attack when the low flow of blood, in fact, the flow of blood to the heart is reduced or blocked. Why does that happen? Because of a blockage in the arteries. It does not happen overnight. It takes years of fat buildup or high levels of cholesterol or the likes. The narrower the arteries, the lesser the flow of the blood. Now, some of you may be surprised to learn that by the time a person reaches a late 20s or early 30s, man or woman, they're likely to already have a certain amount of blockage in the arteries. The blockage, however, is mostly negligible. But one episode of stress can sometimes push the heart over the edge. It can be anything: a new workout regime, a physical ailment, or a stressful life event. Now, the Wuhan virus has been that stressful event for a lot of young people, and old, of course. They're either grieving someone, or stressing over a lost job, or their body is stressed because of long COVID, or COVID-related heart problems. And this is where we must also bring in the role of lifestyle changes. You see, most young people don't get regular heart checkups. And it's obviously because for the longest time, there has not been the need to get your heart checked at an early age. So without pre-cardiac checkups, people sign up for rigorous workout routines. They lift weights, experiment with high-intensity training. Sometimes their heart can't afford this physical stress. But how do you explain this to a workout-obsessed generation? Then there's also the stress from work, what we call occupational stress, one that's constantly on the rise. Sometimes the body is also stressed because of the sedentary lifestyle that a lot of people have, obesity, smoking, all of these contribute to heart attacks at a young age. So if you ask what has changed suddenly in the last couple of years, it's 3 things. 1, pandemic. 2, stress levels. And 3, high-intensity workouts. While the changes have been universal, there are a couple of things that may explain why Indians seem to be more at risk of heart problems. One is genetics. Indians have a high risk of heart diseases. Indians also have smaller blood vessels. Studies say Indians get heart diseases at least 10 years before people in the West do. Meaning, despite all the fried food, an American might get a heart disease only in their 60s. But when an Indian consumes the same kind of food, he or she will likely get be at risk of a heart ailment in their 50s. Over the years, this age bracket has shrunk. So people are getting heart attacks in their 30s and 40s. Indians are also more at risk of premature diabetes. I'm sure you know that India is called the world's diabetes capital. And diabetes, like we mentioned, is one of the leading causes of heart attacks. So what should you do to stay safe? Go for a routine health checkup, especially if you have a family history of heart problems. Doctors say heart ailments in youngsters mostly go undiagnosed. That is what makes the situation all the more critical. You should also keep an eye out for symptoms of heart problems. Your body could be sending signals in unique ways through pain in the arms or in the jaw. You may start feeling restless, heaviness in your chest or in the arms. You must seek medical help the moment you feel uneasy, because at the end of the day, while heart attacks have increased among young people, this is a problem that can totally be avoided. And now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen told a visiting group of former U.S. officials that Taiwan saw off China's military 6 decades ago when its forces bombarded offshore Taiwanese islands, and that resolve to defend the homeland continues to this day. Malaysia's top court has upheld ex-Prime Minister Najib Razak's conviction and 12-year jail sentence in a graft case linked to the looting of the 1MDB state fund. Former U.S. President Donald Trump filed a lawsuit asking a federal judge to appoint a special watchdog to review documents seized from his Florida home by the FBI as part of a criminal investigation of records removed from the White House. A 9-year-old girl died after being shot at a house in Liverpool. The girl was taken to hospital in critical condition after sustaining a gunshot wound to the chest, but later died. The Poyang Lake, the largest freshwater lake in China, entered the dry season ahead of schedule due to hot weather and drought, which has tested China's power generation capacity. Twitter's former security chief says the company misled users and federal regulators about glaring weaknesses in its ability to protect personal data. About 2,000 anti-government demonstrators gathered outside New Zealand's parliament to vent their frustration on a range of issues, nearly 6 months after protesters were forcibly removed from the grounds of the legislature. Heavy rains cause havoc in parts of the U.S. state of Texas as the weather department predicts more rainfall throughout the southern part of the country for the rest of the week. Manchester United get their first Premier League win of the Erik ten Hag era. The Red Devils beat Liverpool 2-1 and climb above their arch-rivals in the table. Jadon Sancho opened the scoring for United before Marcus Rashford made it 2-0. Mohamed Salah scored the only goal for Liverpool. Shakhtar Donetsk and Metalist 1925 Kharkiv kicked off the new season of the Ukrainian Premier League with a 0-0 draw in Kyiv. This was the first competitive match played in Ukraine since December last year. The return of the league comes a day before Ukraine's Independence Day on Wednesday.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.